Welcome to the Maple Desk, a channel focused on contemporary writing. I'm Spencer. Today, we're going to be discussing Denis Johnson's 2011 novella, Train Dreams. Contrary to the size of this small book, Train Dreams is actually a sweeping epic. Because of the recent film, this felt like a great time to go and take a deep dive into this fantastic novella. To analyze the work, I'll give a brief plot summary, then go over the funky, innovative structure in the book, then give you 3 techniques of how Johnson is creating this epic feeling, as well as at the very end, one counter to this prevailing style. Let's get into it. Plot summary. Train Dreams is the life of Robert Grenier, living in rural Idaho in the early to mid-1900s. Through Grenier, we watch tree canopies roll to asphalt, engines crackle and boom, in a story of superb, albeit brief, tenderness. So when I talk about structure, I'm not getting into the fact that it's nonlinear. There's plenty of books out there that don't have a linear narrative structure. What I mean is in traditional novel, and I believe script storytelling as well, there is a climax you're building towards, and that happens 80-90% of the way through the book. The stakes escalate, things become more dire, more difficult, more grand, and more epic. Here in Train Dreams, though, the climax of the story happens 30% of the way through the book. In Chapter 4, Gladys, who is Robert Grenier's wife, and their daughter perish in a wildfire that takes out his home, takes out the wildlife, takes out his family. The most emotionally impactful, it is the most stirring and jarring thing by a pretty wide margin in this book. So because of this unorthodox structure, we're not building towards this final event. It's concerned a lot more with the grieving period, what happens after, the long outstretch of afterwards from this very intensive event. The book isn't really about the big thing. So now that we've got those 2 grounding details, let's get into the writing technique. How exactly is Johnson accomplishing this epic, grand feeling throughout the book? Here's the first way. Modifiers. I'll throw a definition of modifiers. I feel like it's always good to brush up on our terminology. Essentially, a modifier is a word within a phrase that is not essential, but is impacting another word or a part of the phrase. So this includes adjectives, and it also includes adverbs. Here in Chapter 2, Grenier is working out in the woods, clearing out trees for roads, for land, for development. Look at all the modifiers you can find, and all these modifiers having to do with the sense of size. Now let's go to the dot camp to investigate. Here in just one sentence, we can see how scattered his work is with these modifiers. There are swarms of men. The wooden trestles are massive, and the chasm is impassable. And impassable gets us more to an idea of circumstance as opposed to purely something about size. We also get the sense of scale when we're talking about what does not exist within a space. For instance, their noses erased. Modifiers here are being pushed to extremes. On 53 here, we have another instance of scale that has less to do with a modifier, but more about story context. In the passage, we learn Robert Grenier is listening to wolves howl in the distance, but it's not just at any sort of distance. He's hearing them all the way from British Columbia. On page 81, we have another section that is loaded with modifiers. We get another modifier of scale that is about absence here with the phrase perpetual silence, again calling to the size, the grandness, the largeness of the silence itself. And in describing his train dreams, which we'll get to in a bit, they are described as roaring. There's one more example of scale through modifiers and circumstance I want to get to here. Grenier, later in life, all of a sudden gets like really aroused, kind of out of nowhere. He's seen very sexlessly, like there's no sexual component to the character until maybe like 10 to 15 pages before the end of the book. And once we get here, he's not just lustful and aroused. He is like the most lustful and the most aroused someone has ever been. Let's go to the dot cam here. Quick digression here. I've read this book 3 times now. And the first time that I read this, I was an incredibly critical reader. See, my first note on here is not complimentary at all of his innards began to flutter. And then my new note on here is, it's fine, relax. I digress. He sees an advertisement for like a lewd sex show, and body is vibrating, it's shaking, and it's not just shaking of like, oh, I have a physical reaction to it. It's he felt sure he was rocking the entire avenue like a rowboat. Great little simile at the end. But it's like my body's shaking so much, the street is shaking. What's fascinating as we go to page 112 here is that this like erotic trance that he's placed in gets broken by looking out on the sheer scale of the wilderness. You get this description here. Beyond, he saw the Canadian Rockies still sunlit, snow-peaked 100 miles away, as if the earth were in the midst of its creation, the mountains taking their substance out of the clouds. He'd never seen so grand a prospect. The forests that filled his life were so thickly populated and so tall that generally they blocked him from seeing how far away the world was. But right now, it seemed clear there were mountains enough for everybody to get his own. The curse had left him. The contagion of his lust had drifted off and settled into one of those distant valleys. So now let's jump to the second method he uses, which is much more straightforward. Units of measurement. By simply calling out the size, because we know how large things are. If you tell us something is blank amount of feet, blank amount of inches, blank amount of centimeter for all you normal folks out there in the world. Here on page 51, Grenier is building a new house, and we get several explicit units of measurement. He built his cabin 18 by 18. He raised 4 walls nearly 8 feet in height. This happens not just here, but in several instances throughout the book where he will just call out the actual size of an object that is large. Certainly, as writers, we have a tendency to get a little cute with stuff, and I'm here to give you permission to use units of measurement if you need to make something feel big. Just tell us how big it is, you know? You don't have to do a whole simile about it. It's okay. Now let's get on to the third way that he's able to create the sense of scale, which is through the trains. There are many occasions where trains occur throughout the piece, but we're going to focus on just a couple that signify this sense of scale and size. So here, let's go to the doc cam footage and look at this section from page 25 to about 27. We're learning a bit about Grenier's backstory in this chapter, and we learn that Grenier was brought to his new family from a train. We don't know much about his sort of quote-unquote original family, his original mom and dad. He was raised by extended family, and he came there via train when he was very, very young. We also get mentioned that trains were used for the, quote, mass deportation of Chinese families. Trains now become this tool for large-scale change in someone's life. Large in terms of its impact personally, and large in terms of its ability and capacity. So trains are already doing something that's playing with this grandness, this large feeling. Next on page 51, it's very brief, but the train brings Grenier from his home to his work site. Trains are now the divider that takes us between domestic life and work life. We now have something that is fast enough and can cover enough ground that there is a land separation between work and personal life. Here on 54 to 55, we have a different instance of how trains are used to signify the sense of grandness. Kootenai Bob is a flat character that appears throughout, and the one trait we know about him is that he does not drink. Of course, we twist the one characteristic of the flat character, falling over himself, and he goes and he passes out on the train tracks. The next morning, they find out that the train has run over him while he was passed out. So it's talking about almost this unstoppable nature of time and of innovation, of technology that will just ram through somebody who is not paying attention. This is what I would call the title passage, where we're getting a direct reference to the name of the book, so I'm going to read it out in full. Often he dreamed of trains, and often of one particular train. He was on it. He could smell the coal smoke. A world went by. And then he was standing in that world as the sound of the train died away. Here's my interpretation. I think it points to a certain aboutness of the book in general, and why we're trying to make things feel epic and large. In this dream, Grenier is on a train, reminiscent to how when he was a kid he was on a train and it brought him to his new family. And the world outside of the train goes by him. He sees it passing. It doesn't say the train drops him off, right? Again, we get this kind of like broken, glitchy dream logic. He's in the world that was passing around him, and the thing that was anchoring him, the train, is moving on without him. The train is never given a sense of humanity. There's no personification that ever occurs with the train, which I think is very intentional and very wise to do. It goes from this place to that place by the directives of other people. World moves on without him as he still tries to process his grief and build his house and find his community. And why this book is even an epic in the first place, our stationary point of Grenier, the man on the train, we're seeing how society moves forward. So now that we've covered some of the writing techniques of grandness, I want to get to that counter that I mentioned up top. There's some moments where Denis Johnson is going small with his description. Let's start at a page like 38 to 41 to see one of these small examples and why we're getting small. Chapter 4 is where we meet Gladys, Granier's only love interest during the book. In this moment of initial courtship that we get some of these small, intimate details. Let's look at these lines. The buttercups nodded in the breeze, and the petals of the daisies trembled. We are focusing in on flowers, on the slight tremble. I mean, you split that description at 38 with the wildfire description here, and just look at these modifiers. Flaming mammoth spruce trees as they fell, a forest of charred, gigantic spears, so much ash, so much choking smoke, right? That's the description that we're accustomed to. There's another section here where a woman's husband has passed away. I believe her name is Claire Thompson, and she's kind of striking out to make a new life for herself. We've progressed far past the initial shock, the prolonged initial shock of losing his whole family and losing his home. I wouldn't call it like happiness, but has a contentness in this section of the book. The caravan moved slowly enough that the children's pup was able to jump down from its perch atop the cargo to chase gophers and nose at their burrows, then clamber up the road bank to a high spot and jump down again between the children, who sat stiff-armed with their feet jutting out in front, hanging onto the tie-downs on either side of them. Bucolic, we're in nature, there's a dog, it's slow-moving caravan, everything seems kind of breezy. Like if you just read that passage, you're like, oh yeah, this is a pretty chill book. I want to point out one last counter move here on 91 that I think is really clever, and loaded as many of her worldly possessions onto the wagon as the horses would pull, mostly heavily locked trunks, tools, and kitchen gear, heaping the rest aboard the Model T, and creating a pile as high as a man could reach with a hoe. And at the pinnacle, 2 mattresses and 2 children, and also a little dog. Why do I like this so much? Because, of course, we're getting a large accumulation of all this person's possessions, right? 2 mattresses, 2 kids, and at the very top of this large pile of things, we get little dog. The same way that when people are kind of listing things in threes, they'll twist on the 3. It's the same principle that he's using, but going big, 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 small. So that is going to do it for the video. Hopefully you picked up on some cool writing techniques that you can keep in the back of your head. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading.